Okay, one more thing to share for this week. If you want to clean up and start mapping a data table that looks like this one, that's more complicated than the one that I showed you last night, something like median value or median household income, where all of your information is already in one column, how on earth do you make any sense of a table like this one? This is the value breakdown for housing units in all census tracts across Monroe County. And you can see, the margins of error spit out here, and here are all the different categories, and there are zillions of them. And so we could do the simple cleanup, get the GeoID all ready to go and bring this table in, but there's not really sort of one magic column in this table that's going to be easy to map. And in fact, there are way more categories of value breakdowns than I could possibly need. It's just not that helpful to map building values in $15,000 increments. All of these categories are sort of a relic of the census collecting this data over a long period of time. And in the 1920s and 40s, these kinds of value breakdowns are really helpful and informative. Not as helpful anymore. And so how on earth do you make some sense of this? The moral of the story is however you get Excel to do the things you want, that is the correct way to do that. So if you find some workarounds that work for you and are not the same ones that I use, but they get the job done, do those. I'm just going to show you sort of how I've gotten to address a table like this that for me does this sort of as quickly and painlessly as possible, but by no means is it the only way to navigate this kind of thing in Excel. And so, and this is true of the maps, Excel, any kind of program you're using this semester. However you get it to do the thing you want it to do, we're going to call that a win, and that's the process is fine by me. What I do with a table like this, because it's incredibly hard for me to read, I don't have all these categories memorized. And so I don't know where the columns start and stop that are the ones that I really want and need. And so it's very hard for me to play with this as it currently is. So what I like to do is flip things around a little bit. They make it easier for me to read. And then I put it back together in a way that'll be easier for the computer to read. So here's what I mean by that. If you click anywhere inside this table, here we got a whole bunch of cells all in a row that have stuff in it. If I say to select all, it's just Control A on a PC. I'm guessing it's OpenAppLA on your Mac. You can also find it in your menu bar. But it's smart enough that it selects just this part of this huge long spreadsheet that has stuff in it. So this, what it just did is selected all of the rows and columns with stuff as part of this table. And so I'm going to copy all these things. I just Controlled C, and so you can see that boundary. I always like to leave an original copy because half the time I mess up in some way, and then I know I have the original stuff and I don't have to go back to the website and start totally from scratch. So I just make a new tab, came over here. One of the things you can do in Excel, I'm going to right click, so I bring up this menu, but I could find it here on the menu bar too. You can paste in a bunch of different ways. You can just copy and paste and it'll look exactly like it did on the other slide. But one of the things you can do, which is pretty helpful right here, is transpose. So that's where it is on my menu bar. If I'm going to right click, I got these paste options, and here's my transpose right here. You can see kind of in the icon that what it's doing is flipping stuff. And so here's what it looks like when it transposes. What happened here, and some of you have already played around with this, is effectively it made the rows the columns and the columns the rows. And so now in one column, here are all my income breakdowns, which for me is much easier to read. For the computer is going to be impossible to make a map. But for right now, I'm the person who matters. So I'm just going to insert some rows right here. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I don't know why, but the website likes to spit out our column headings at the bottom, which doesn't make any sense, but here they are. So one of the first things I'm going to do is bump these up to the top. I just cut them from down there. And then I'm just going to paste them up here. So all I did, I cut them, so now they're no longer down here, because that would only confuse things to have them in two different places. So this at least is much easier for me to read. Still not great, but easier. Now, the other thing is I don't care about these margins of errors, and you don't have to either. It would be totally possible, but a big pain in the neck to go delete, highlight the next one, delete, delete, especially on a table like this where there are zillions of margins of error. So one of the things I do is just highlight all of these columns. And again, you can highlight the row by clicking somewhere in the gray box. If I clicked on this one, it's only going to click on one cell at a time. But if you get right over where that number 3 is, clicks the whole row. If I were to do the same up top, like where the B is, it's going to highlight the whole column. If I click on individual cells, it won't do that for me. So I'm starting with the 3. I'm going to click and I'm going to hold my mouse down so I can highlight all of these rows. Because one of the things I notice is that all of the rows that I care about, these variables I care about, start with the word estimate, and all of the ones I don't start with the word margin. And so one of the things I can do, just for the moment, is to say, you know what, computer, sort these and sort it by this column right here. I don't have, we're going to sort it right here by that one. Again, this is just an interim step. I'll show you what it does. And so now what it did, if you look at these values, they're in a weird order because it didn't know exactly how to order these. It's ordering them like words and not numbers, but that's fine. I'm going to fix that in a little bit. But here, what this did real quickly for me, all my estimates up here. And what happened, all my margins of errors came down here. So I can highlight all of these rows and get rid of them in one step. You could have just as easily, if that process makes you crazy, you could just have easily deleted each one of those rows at a time. This is one of those tables with a ton of rows, and I'm kind of lazy about it. And so I just decided to sort, and so I could delete them all at once. This now is a challenge because to the computer, if it's alphabetizing words, this category, the houses that are 1 million to 1.5 million, it alphabetizes that ahead of some of these other numbers, which is not helpful to me because I'm going to try and add up. I just want to know where all these categories are that are under $100,000, and now they're all over the place. If you notice, this column here is the code that spits out of the website. Totally meaningless, and we're going to get rid of it real soon. But for this step, it knows and has memorialized the right order for all of these categories. So I'm just going to highlight all of these things again, and I'm going to use that sort trick to get these back in the right order. One of the things you'll notice here is that it got rid of that first row. It made that not highlighted anymore. And the reason is it's misunderstanding and thinks that's where my headers are, or my column headings. And that's not, this is not a column heading row. That's a row that I want to sort along with my others. So all I'm going to do is click right off of this one. You see, I'm toggling that box right here. My data has headers. My data actually doesn't, because all I did was highlight the data rows. I didn't highlight, you see here, my headers or my labels. I didn't highlight those at all. So I can click off on that. Before, this was the column B that I sorted, and that's what it thinks I want to do again. I don't want to do that again. And so I can just switch where it is I want to, which column I want to use to sort this information. Here I want to use this column, these crazy codes, and you'll see why. When these are in order, and again, these are in order in a way that is the computer is alphabetizing these, because again, it thinks these are words, they start with a B. It gets these back in the right order. And so if you look at my values, all down here, they're actually in numerical order. The computer couldn't figure that out trying to do it with this column, but it can figure it out with this one. So now I've got rid of my margins of errors. Everything's in the right order. And it's very easy for me to see where properties are that are valued somewhere between $0 and $100,000. That's this chunk right here. It's currently broken up into a whole bunch of different categories, but I can very easily make it just one category. So I'm going to give myself some extra room, just insert some new stuff. And I'm going to type in here value less than 1. Again, this is just for me, so I remember what on earth I did. I'm going to fix these, right? This is my full ID. We're going to clean that up in a second. You can see that's a problem. We got the geography here. This is our units, just owner units because we're looking at value, and here value less than 100K. Again, it's a meaningful summary for me. If that makes no sense and you'll look at that later and not have any idea what it is you were talking about, summarize it some other way. But now it's really easy for me here. I'm going to do one of these equations that we've used before. I just typed in the equal sign. And the thing I want to do is I want to sum up all of these columns. Since I have a lot, it's easier for me to just say summarize these instead of clicking on them one by one. I could make an equation that I want this one plus this one plus this one. And if I were only adding 2 or 3 things together, that might be the easiest way to do it. I got a lot here. And again, I'm a little bit lazy. And so I'm going to use a shortcut. Sum adds all the numbers in a range of cells. And so all you need to do is open up your parentheses and it's asking, all right, well, what are these range of cells? I'm going to click on the first one and I'm going to drag all the way down to the last one. And so you see what it did here. It's figured out that I want to start at C. Here's column C, row 6, start at C6. I want to go all the way to C, column C, 18. 18 is what I did. Close up those parentheses and hit, and you can see it's sort of tracking what I'm doing. It's made this blue rectangle for me. So I can see exactly what it was that I set up to do. And I can double check that, yep, that ends exactly where I want it to end. It just doesn't accidentally pick up these guys at all. And I hit return. And then it just so happens that all of the housing in the census tract, all 80 units, fall in these value categories. And I can double check that things look right by just scanning down. Yep, the rest of those are zeros. That makes sense. I can do the same thing here, equals sum and sum these guys all up. But again, I'm lazy and I don't want to do that because I've already done it once. So if I click on where my equation is, so this is the one we already did, this cell right here, in here is equals sum, blah, blah, blah. So Excel knows exactly what it needs. When I've highlighted this, first off, I'll tell you why it's worried. It's worried because I added up numbers and then I stopped, even though there are more numbers right next to the ones I was using. It just wants to make sure that I didn't accidentally forget some stuff, and I didn't. In some cases, that's a helpful catch because you might have accidentally forgotten the last cell to add, but that's what it's worried about. I'm not worried about that, so I'm going to ignore that. You see when I highlight this cell, there's this little square here at the bottom. And when I hover over that little square, my cursor changes. It goes from a big white plus to a skinny black plus. When I'm in the skinny black plus, if I click on that square, I can then drag. I'm still clicked down and I'm just going to drag it all the way across all of my different rows. So you can see all these times that I don't have to re-enter this stuff all over again. And then I'm going to unclick when I get to the end. What it did, and we can check any of these here. These aren't as helpful to check because all these columns are zeroed out, but here's one that has numbers in it. There's our equation. Here it's column GI. And again, goes from 6 to 18. If I were to click anywhere up here, I'm clicking where my equation's written, and that helpful blue box will pop up. And so I can see exactly what it did. It just did the exact same thing, switching one column to another. And so now what I've got are just these rows here that are actually really helpful for me to bring into my map. And now I could have my one column, which is going to be this one, that's just the values that are less than $100,000. If I wanted to, I'm going to insert one more row because one thing I'll do while we're here is I'm going to also want to do a percent valued. I can do that right in here. I can also use my map to do that if I wanted. There's a way to normalize what it is that you're mapping, and so to effectively calculate the percent in your symbology. Again, I'm already speaking in codes. I find it easier to do my calculations in Excel, but you could do it either way. So now I'm valued less than 100K. And here again, I can just use Excel to do my formulas. The percent is just equal sign. It's going to be the number that's valued less than $100,000 divided by the total number. And you can see again, it's showing me it's the blue divided by the red. This one's 100%, makes sense. And again, I can do the same, just drag these guys all the way over. Things I do not have to calculate again. Okay, one last thing to do. is to get this back into a format that the computer is going to understand. Because again, this is easier for me to work with, but the computer is not going to understand it. Again, I save every step. Now, again, if you click on any of these numbers, it'll highlight the whole row. That's what I want to do. Because these are just the things I want. I don't care about any of those other categories for my map. So I'm going to copy this. Another good trick here, I'm going to right click. We're going to look at all the special ways you can paste something. We've already done one of these, that transpose trick, but we want to do a couple things this time around. First off, we want to do another transpose because we want to flip the rows to columns and columns to rows. And then the other neat thing you can do is right here, just bring in the values. Just bring in the values and I'll show you what it does. And so here it brought everything in. Over on this sheet, if I look in here, it's actually not a value, it's an equation. If I were to bring this, I'm going to copy it again. If I were to have just transposed it, just transposed, or a paste special, just transposed, what would happen is that my equation would have copied over. And this time around, this equation, you can see where it's looking. It's looking over here, figuring it's going to try and look for the sum in the relatively same place it looked for the sum before, but I didn't bring any of those other variables over. And so all of these columns have gone to 0 because it doesn't know how to calculate stuff. So it brought over the equations, but the equations are pretty meaningless right now. What we did over here when we clicked on just value, bring over the value, this 80 is now no longer an equation, it's the 80. This isn't the equation to figure out the percentage, it's just the value that we got. I'm going to get rid of these guys because that's not helpful. I just brought those over to show you what would happen, but that's particularly helpful. One of the challenges here is we got some of these columns that couldn't calculate percentages because the denominator was going to be 0. You can't divide by a 0. And so this is Excel speak for trying to divide by a 0. I'm going to want to get rid of this just so that the map doesn't mistake this column here as a text field. Because again, here, this is kind of a word. So I can just copy this one. And again, we're good at finding replace. Anytime you see that weird symbol, replace it with nothing. And the next one, replace, and we can just say replace all. And so now I know that that's okay. You can get rid of this column again, or this row. And the last thing we need to do is get our GeoID in place. So we're copying this one. Here's my full ID. We're going to keep the full ID just in case everything goes wrong. But here's our other trick. We're going to find replace. We did this on the other video. Asterisk US. So anything that comes before US, I want to replace with nothing. Just in this column. You see, I highlighted this column. And so find, replace, and then go ahead and replace all those. I'm going to do two things just to reinforce to the computer that this is a text field. I can change it up here. I can turn the formatting into text. You see how it flipped over to the other side, the same way words are formatted. But I still don't trust my map, and so I'm going to put a letter. I always put an A. You can use any letter you want, or you can find another workaround that consistently works so that that captures that field as a text field. But that's what I like to do, just to be totally sure. I've got my GeoID column, and here I'm going to make sure this has a different column heading. There's my GeoID. I've done all these things to make sure it looks right and it's captured as a text field. And now I've got this column right here that's the percent of housing units in the census tract that are valued under $100,000. And now I have something that I can map. So I'm going to save this first. This saves it as an Excel. And then I'm going to want to save this as a CSV file that I can bring into my map. And so here's my Monroe County CTs for median value. I'm going to save this as something similar. value less than 100. Save it as CSV, and you'll know it works as a CSV because it'll warn me, wait, you got a couple different tabs, and I know that, that's fine, but it's just going to bring this one. So here it changed that sheet name right there, and now I know. So just a way to use that transpose, the paste special, pasting just values, doing those kinds of steps. Again, that's the way I've personally found it's easiest to, as quickly as possible, turn a completely cumbersome and excessive census table that comes out of the website into something that I can use. If you come up with a better workaround, do it. You by no means need to use the tricks that I used, but just to give you some ideas about what's in Excel so that you don't have to do as many of those steps by hand and the program can do more of them for you. So please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions, but I hope that is helpful.